here to introduce the Reverend Dr. Lindsay Armstrong. She's trained at Princeton Seminary. She's a Presbyterian minister, which is a great thing to be in a place like this. And she is married to Mark. Mark is also a Presbyterian minister, but teaches ethics at Columbia Seminary in Atlanta, which is where they live. They have a daughter, Logan. Lindsay has been a solo pastor. She's been a lead pastor in a multi-clergy congregation. But most important for us today, for the last 10 years, she has worked with a not-for-profit company, wholly owned by the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta, and it's called New Church Development. And she's worked with new worshiping communities, what we might also call fresh expressions of church, but also with traditional churches like this one and all the others that are wanting to do something new and wanting to think about themselves in a different way. And I have the privilege of having heard this workshop twice before, and I think you're in for a treat today, because all of us are in a changing landscape. There can surely not be one of us sitting or standing here who does not realize we're in a changing landscape of church. Nothing is the same. And people like myself, we're very badly suited for such conditions, because I was baptized into this denomination, and I'm still standing here, and no one taught me what to do when the tectonic plates shifted like they are now. But Lindsay's had some experience, and she's got a lot of knowledge in this area, and in such a lovely and a gentle way. One of the things I wondered, and she knows me well enough to forgive me, I thought, well, is she going to say something that'll make us feel awkward? Because we think, oh, well, this comes from the States, and she thinks she has the answer. There's been none of that. She has always asked, in the two instances, us to translate what she's saying into our neighborhood. And that's what we have to do. It's our job. She can't do it for us. She doesn't live here. So we're going to have to take the knowledge that she imparts, but also the stories, and translate it to our situation. And if we can do that, I think we're in for a great treat today, because she's going to give us a view on the future and some hints on how we can live a new story. Thank you, Lindsay. Welcome.
Good morning, friends. It is good to be with you. I've learned from the last two times, one in Durban and one in Cape Town, that we might not only have Presbyterians here. So I need to know who's in the house. So if you are a Presbyterian elder or leader or pastor, would you raise your hand? Okay, that's most of us. Okay. Any of our Pentecostal friends? It's okay. You can raise your hand. You're good at it, actually. No? Okay. UCC? Okay, good. Who else? Who haven't I mentioned? Nice. Anybody else? Wow, we got everybody right there. Okay, good. Well, I wanted to make sure that we did not overlook anyone, because this is a time for actually leaning in on partnerships. It's a time for leaning in on relationships, and it's a time for maximizing those as best we can. And so I wanted to certainly welcome and acknowledge you if you were not a part of the expected Presbyterian circles right here. Okay, so I have one whole page of notes. There we go. Okay, so I, first off, bring you greetings from a lot of people who know I am here and who honestly wish they were with me. So these are some of the leaders who I work with a lot. They are the ones I work with most commonly. And what got me to this place of feeling like I actually have something to say in this really hard moment is that 10 years ago, I was asked to help start new churches. The idea was to see if we could have vibrant mainline churches that would grow. And it was a question, and they didn't know if I was going to have a job 2 years later. And I couldn't believe I left a fantastic pastorate to say yes to this. This is not a good offer, right? But I felt called to it, and so we started. And about 5 years in, we were having such remarkable success that I started working with people in other parts of the United States, across our denomination. And what we were seeing was not always the success, But, I mean, we had some closures and things like that too, don't get me wrong. But what happened is I got curious, but then again, so did everybody else. Why, in an era when churches are closing right and left, or at least declining, did we have so much growth and life and vitality? And every one of these new churches were very different. None of them looked like the other at all. And so it took some work to really sit back and wonder and really start to think about what they're all doing that's similar, even though they are all so different. And so that's the background that I am bringing for you today. But I also just need to say thank you for having me here. I have loved being in South Africa. You have a beautiful country. Yes, I hear you. Amen. Let's hear it. Amen. Yes, you have an amazing country. And yeah, I've tried boboti. I'm a big fan of Durban mutton curry. I am. Yeah, I'm in love with the land, and also I'm really enjoying the people. This is not the first time I've been here, but it is really, really, really quite good to be back. Somehow you connect with certain places. For me, that was always Colorado, which is home for me, not necessarily Atlanta. But South Africa is that too. And my family has been here 4 times. I hope that this is, we'll get to come back again in a few years. So thank you. Quick show of hands. I want to make sure, and I think I know by now the answer, but let's just go ahead and do this. So in the U.S., almost every church, most churches have fewer members now than they did 4 years ago. If that's true for you, yeah? Okay. Not fun. In the U.S., at least, we have been closing churches and even having to sell buildings. And maybe you haven't closed your church, but have you seen this at least? Yeah? Okay. And then last but not least, fewer people means less money and fewer volunteers. And this is really hard then because the call is just as powerful. God is still on the move and doing incredible things. And we don't necessarily have the resources we're used to having to get this done. Is that also resonating? Yes? Okay, good. Just want to make sure that we are all on the same page. And this is hard because Presbyterians in particular, we are not good at change, right? So maybe you have the same sad, sorry joke we do. How many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb? See, you're laughing because you already know the answer. Change? We're going to change that light bulb? Yeah. So change is just hard, and it's not our strong suit. So here's one of the interesting things. Most people imagine evolution as steady, progressive change. So in fact, in biology, evolution is the change, right? We're going to do science for half a minute, so just roll with me, okay? In biology, evolution is the change that characterizes a species over several generations, right? So this is Darwin, love him or not, it doesn't matter to me, but the theory of evolution by natural selection is the process by which organisms vary over time as a result of changes in their inherited physical or behavioral traits. So evolutionary alterations, they're viewed as slow-moving modifications, which allow an organism to adequately adapt to shifted circumstances or environments. This is why we think of change as slow, steady, progressive. Here's what biologists now recognize. That's not true. What biologists now recognize is that evolutionary development is marked not by slow, steady change, but by rapid, isolated periods of rapid speciation between long periods of little or no change. I mean, sure, there's the kind of change that just you have to do to kind of keep up, basically. But in other words, there's extended periods of relatively little variation. I mean, just variation that's just kind of edits. Followed by these bursts of activities during which there is substantive, discontinuous transformation that occurs everywhere. And what this thing is called is punctuated equilibrium. No test later, don't worry. But in a world of punctuated equilibrium, there are lengthy periods of virtual standstill, followed by episodes of swift evolution and change. And in this new world, like the dinosaurs, there are many who are incapable of surviving in the newfound ecosystem. After all, when an ecosystem changes, what the life knows corresponds to a reality that no longer exists. This is where we are as the 21st century mainline church. And what's required now is not doing more or better relative to that world we know all about, because it's changing. Instead, what's required now is a willingness to learn the nature of the new world and engage as God calls in faithfully redesigning in order to thrive in that environment. This is the task of the 21st century church. So since I'll give you a copy of this PowerPoint and PDF version if you want it, I mean, if you don't want it, just delete. But if you do, I put in a lot of words on this part because I wanted to kind of get them right. Because at least for me, I always thought of change as slow, steady, progressive, and it suited me just fine. But the question in the face of each of these radical upheavals is not now a question of how we can do more or better relative to the world that we know. Instead, the crucial test was then and is now a question of whether we can adapt. It's a question of whether we can learn the nature of the new world and redesign, because God's purposes go forward. God is still at work. And we've been here before as a church. In the United States, it's most recently for us, 1833, when the Bill of Rights was passed, ended a whole church season that made everybody in the church feel like life was over. Because in 1833, Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments, basically there was a constitutional amendment that said, you know, the government will not sponsor any religion, period. Up until then, all the churches, they were sponsored by the state. The state paid the clergy, did the training, bought the buildings, built the buildings, gave the clergy a huge place in society, did all these things. And suddenly, the last of it closed up in 1833. Yes, they felt like the world was ending. How do you be church if you don't have the state underwriting your church anymore? But Christians, we've been here. I mean, Reformation, even before that, the big East-West divide in 1054. Before that, Middle Ages, Roman Empire kind of collapses, and Pope Gregory and St. Columba and all these others decide to go ahead and build what will be the next church for 500 years. And it goes like this. So we've been here before, but this you don't have to worry about reading because the print is very small. But the bottom line is this, and this is what I want to jump in on. For decades, we've been looking for silver bullets. We've been looking for anything that will help us navigate the absolute whirlwind of change that we have going on in our churches. And that won't just help us navigate it, but help us get out of it or thrive in it or somehow survive in it and come out on top. And we have developed so many methods for managing change, and we've tried this and we've done that. And despite a completely abysmal record of results, what we haven't fully gotten our mind around is that the issue is not about method, it's about mindset. Paul tells us we're transformed by the renewing of our minds. This is about mindset, because there's no right way to manage the change we are looking at, because it is discontinuous change. It is paradigm shifting change. And at least the kind of change that we are losing sleep over, you and I. And so if you are a church leader, as we are church leaders in the 21st century, answers and prescriptions about what you need, what I need, are not the way to go forward. What we may need instead, what may prove the most generative, the most helpful, the most centering and right and good with our soul, is if we can get the new mindsets and ideas and practices that are emerging, if we can help see them, if we can help each other see them, so that we can contrast them with the world that we know, and so that we can then examine these assumptions consciously and then come back with an understanding of the fundamental shifts of mindset that need to happen in order for us to deal with the things that are currently showing up as problems. Does this make sense so far? You with me? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. I feel like this is an Abraham and Sarai moment. God came and said, Abram, Sarai, go from your country, go from your people, go from your land, go from everything you know to the place where I will show you. And what's going to happen? You'll be blessed to be a blessing. And the other promise that happens a few chapters later, your descendants will be more numerous than the stars. So I feel like this is an Abraham and Sarah moment where we are being asked to journey, to go on, to follow God into this future that we do not exactly know what it will look like. And so what I want to do with us today is talk about some of the shifts that I am seeing that are absolutely characteristic in every one of the churches that I work with in the United States, and half of them are in Atlanta, the other half are across the nation, who are thriving. And I've also learned a lot from those who are not thriving, because often, and almost usually, they are the ones not participating in these shifts. They are holding on to this institutional era where the world worked this way, and that way. And they are not engaging these practices. And that doesn't mean that these shifts are silver bullets. It just means that they're conversation starters. It means that they are what people that I am seeing and have been working with for 10 years who are really thriving and succeeding and who have churches who are growing are actually doing on the ground in a very tangible way. So the first thing we start with is actually a funeral, and I'm sorry. But this is hard, right? This is a hard moment. And so we need to be able to grieve, because we're saying goodbye to a lot. We are here because we love the church. We are here because we know of God's power working through it. We are here because we want the best for the church, and we are actually having to say goodbye to a lot that we no longer have. And this is actually, and that I started seeing a lot of the new churches, or the churches, even if they're not new and they're old, but they've been grieving well. My goodness, they find the strength to say, I am more than what I've lost, and there's a vibrant future ahead, and God's got it. It's almost as if, like Revelation, I love this one, in Revelation 21, the one who sits on the throne says, behold, I make all things new. So, the first shift, kind of unfortunate to have to talk about, but we got to start there, because we're coming from an era, 30, 40 years ago, whenever it was, where churches were strong and shiny and squeaky clean. And at least that was what they projected. And really didn't talk about the problems other than closed door meetings, that kind of a thing. And either the churches were strong, or they were working on appearing so at virtually all times. And right now, we've got to grieve well. It's the only way we get to move forward with this whole thing. And so moving from avoidant to grieving well, the churches moving meaningfully into the future have grieved their past. We as a presbytery, so in Presbytery of Greater Atlanta, and then it passed on to some others about 3 years ago, we as an entire presbytery read this book. Now, it is not a book that's going to help you to grieve well, but it does put front and center the question about being emotionally healthy leaders. And I think that this grieving well piece, along with the other two shifts that we're going to talk about real quick, because we've got some big stuff coming later, and I really want to lean into those three shifts. It has a lot to do with being authentic rather than putting on airs. And that is definitely the emerging era tribute and trait. You see people wanting to be authentic all the time and working hard. And so emotionally healthy leader, this was something our presbytery read all the way through as a, there were like book groups, and we didn't do it actually in the presbytery meetings, but we learned the lesson, and so I'll tell you about what we're now doing in presbytery meetings. But this emotionally healthy leader, it put the emotional health piece front and center at a time when it is really hard to be a healthy Christian leader, because there's so much push and pull and give and take and grief and opportunity and challenge and everything. So the stages of grief. If not, you can look them up. We won't go into all the details. But Elizabeth Schistler-Fiorenza, she was working with terminally ill patients, came out in 1969, the stages of grief. And she was talking about what people go through who are dying. But since then, it's really been broadened out to be about all kinds of grief, because anytime we lose something that mattered to us, that we loved, grieving does not mean we're unwell. It does not mean we're not strong enough. It means we loved and are lost. So those sections, denial, bargaining, anger, depression, acceptance, all stages of grief, they're not linear. They don't happen one after the other, and there's no time frame. It just takes the time it takes. But helping each other grieve well is absolutely critical. The interesting thing is this. So this guy studied with Elizabeth Schistler-Fiorenza, and he was one of her prime students. He studied with her for forever, and until she passed. And he went through some horrible stuff in his life. And so the book we are reading now, and we are involving this actually at the presbytery meetings and are engaging it, is this book, Finding Meaning. Because what David Kessler came along and said after having gone through serious grief in his own life is, there are 5 stages, yeah, but there's actually a 6th one, and that 6th one is finding meaning. We get through all the grief and we find meaning again. And so what he said is he went back to the Schistler-Fiorenza family, who he was quite good friends with at this point, and he said, hey, I think there's a 6th stage. Can we add it in? They talked it through, and it's a yes. So now the bottom line is, according to Kessler, and this part also is shared with Schistler-Fiorenza, we have to acknowledge grief. You can't pretend, you can't package it away and go forward in healthy ways. You can package it away for a little while. That's called denial, but you still got it. You're still carrying it around with you like, a weight tied to your foot. So grief has to be acknowledged. Here's the interesting thing he added to the conversation. He said it has to be acknowledged by others. We can't be alone in our grief. God didn't make us that way, right? It is not good that so-and-so be alone. God's self is a trinity. There's already relationship built in. We need one another because we are created in the image of a triune God. So Grief has to be acknowledged. It has to be witnessed by others. And acceptance is the first step toward finding meaning, because we are more than we have lost. And so I don't know how you might want to do this in your own context, but with a book read or working it into, I don't know, the options are limitless and you're creative, but working some grieving, some communal grieving into this moment in time may not sound so fun, but boy, is it a game changer, because it releases us. And it says we're all in this together and we're all grieving. And it's because what we've lost matters. So it sets us up to heal and to move forward. And so that's from the internet. I didn't actually write that one. I just, it's one of those gifts. And I thought it's helpful to remind ourselves that it's not a sign we're unwell or not strong enough. It's a sign that love has been part of our lives, and we want that to continue even now. So what we want to do, and I'm going to throw these two in quickly because we want to spend more time on the next three. And again, these two shifts, they're important pieces of the overall shift toward real authenticity. But the leaders in this moment who are leading, and leading is all levels, right? It's not just the stated clerk or the, pastor or the whoever. Leadership is at all levels and all peoples. And the other shifts that just have to be named are a shift into humility. In the institutional era that we are leaving, the church was a gathering space, a quite popular one for many long years, right? I mean, the pastors would be invited to say the prayer at the beginning of the rugby game, or, there's social esteem here. And we relished our role as being among the centerpieces of society, and we were right to. That was just the world we lived in. There's nothing wrong with that. There was nothing wrong with those leaders for relishing that role. But right now, in this emerging area, the mainline church is not greeted with unequivocal enthusiasm. Have you noticed? And we're at our best when we're assuming a posture of learning. Just okay, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. And I think we can do this because the shift 3 is also absolutely paramount. I mean, I have seen churches who got the squeaky clean best pastor in the whole world. And, that pastor, hey, I got this. Here's what we're going to do in the first 3 years. And I'm not exaggerating a thing when I say that in 3 years, I have watched more than one church being led by that kind of a posture of a leader die. The emerging era simply invites more humility. We got to grieve well, we've got to have humility, and we've got to shift from muscular optimism to hope. So muscular optimism, right, leans a little bit more on us as being at the centerpiece of our own, needing to provide our own answers. I mean, of course, we place our hope in God, but we kind of lean a little bit more on our own efforts. Whereas hope, I found a beautiful explanation of hope that I really liked. And we know that in this era, we can only place our hope in God. But I want to pass on this. This duo who wrote a book, and it'll be in the handout if you want to read it. It's a good book. It's about 10 years old, and it hasn't necessarily shaped a lot of what I'm doing, but it's still a good book. But I love this quote, because they reframe hope as emotional ease and openness of heart. And frankly, having a little more emotional ease right now, because we don't have to figure it all out, but God, we do have to just faithfully attend God and the call of the moment, and to be bold and sometimes make hard decisions that are courageous, and other times to push pause for a few more beats. This kind of thing Emotional ease and openness of heart reflect an underlying virtue of hope that characterizes the community of faith. You'll get that quote in the PowerPoint too if you would like it. So what we want to do for right now is just stay right here and let you have a few minutes to go ahead, and in your packets that you got, there is a page that says Sanctuary Questions. And it will have too many questions on it for this time. The point is so you can gravitate toward the question that interests you the most. And if you would gather in groups of 2 or 3, in an ideal world, you'll gather with people you don't already know, but that's up to you. And just take a few minutes. Let me get my phone so I know what time it is. Take a few minutes and, about 10 minutes. And because grief has to be witnessed by another, maybe we just take a few minutes and share on that one question. How has the church been humbled in the last 4 years? What have we lost? And just name it in this safe space where we know it will not get repeated. This is not sermon illustration fodder for future, for anything. This is you all as leaders of the church taking advantage of safe space to say, yeah, let's go ahead and start this, this acknowledgement that grief needs to be on our grieving well, needs to be a part of the call of the moment. So if you get in groups of 2 or 3, you'll have more time to talk. But go ahead and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes and just buddy up and see what you come up with. What are you grieving? How have we been humbled? What have we lost in the last 4 years? Okay, let's join back together. That's just a taster. You did not have enough time, but the idea is to start to see the shifts for how we behave and how we are, and to take them back to your congregation in the ways that make sense for you, or your presbytery, or your judicatory in whatever way. But we're going to move forward because I really love seeing the next ones. Like we said, we had to start with a funeral, not ideal. But that grieving well and the moving from kind of avoidant to grieving well, the move from hubris to humility, the move from muscular optimism to hope, and hope fully grounded in God. They are all part of the shift of the emerging era that really prioritizes people being very authentic and whole-bodied at all times, and not just, presenting this part of self now and this part of self now. It's a larger conversation, but those 3 pieces have been game changers for people. And I hope that you'll find the right ways to incorporate this into yours. But for now, okay, do you all have Blockbuster Video, or did you have Blockbuster Video? Okay, you did. I imagine that there's a different video store that was probably more popular. Okay, but you did have Blockbuster Video. Okay, so I want to bring us back to there. Blockbuster Video started in 1985. It quickly grew. It became kind of a round-the-world phenomenon. It was the store, thousands, tens of thousands of stores around the world where you could go rent your videos. I was a frequent customer. And so... in 2000, so it started in 85. By 2010, it had declared bankruptcy. And by 2014, it had closed its last store. Now, the thing about Blockbuster is this. The manager of the store could not have renovated the space and gotten more customers. The manager, if he or she had been replaced with somebody younger and maybe with a family, would not have had more customers. The manager of the store, if they had brought in, a certain kind of music and had music nights or whatever, would not have gotten more customers. Why? Come on, say it out. Why? Yeah. Internet, Netflix, yeah. We all still love movies. That didn't go away. What went away is the way we wanted to receive our movies, the way we wanted to get our movies, the way we wanted to have access to our movies. Similarly, people are all about God. They're interested in deep spiritual conversations. They want to know what it means to have a living, viable relationship with the one creator of all. They want to know what it means when you say God is sovereign. And they don't necessarily need the seminary-trained lines. They want honest conversations about it. They do want places to worship. They do want spiritual conversation. It's just changing about how they would like to experience church. Yeah? The demand, well, the meaning is still with us. They still want that. But how we provide church is changing. And so I want to talk about this one shift that is really big. In a minute, we're going to get to another shift and come back to this one because both of them seem to be happening at the same time. But there is this shift that in the age of institutions, and what we're talking about when we're talking about that is we're talking about the age when institutions around the world built up and became strong and huge. We're talking educational institutions, government, business, church, etc. For us, this is kind of the 1950s, 60s, 70s model of church that emerged that was great. There's not a thing wrong with that. We just are in a different emerging era now. And so back in the day, churches started or they sustained and thrived insofar as they responded to demand. So here's the crazy thing. I couldn't find South African statistics, but maybe it'll translate nonetheless. In the U.S., churches in the 50s and 60s were growing faster than the population. The buildings that were being built in 1945, I had to write this one down, Americans spent $26 million on sacred architecture. That's it's almost $500 million rand. By 1950, 5 years later, they spent $409 million on sacred architecture. That is 8 billion. It's almost 8 billion rand. And by 1960, 10 years later, the amount they spent that year on building church buildings, $1 billion. That is 18 billion 896,000 rand. What's still in the imagination of some of the church people who we know and love and are church with is this era when basically everybody just breathlessly tried to keep up. You offered a pretty good church, a good enough church that had good Sunday school and good preaching and good worship, and your pews would be full. And this era, the church just had a center, kind of corner market, not the only one, but a central corner market on society. It was the place to be, and judicatories especially just worked to keep up. The staff of a particular church, their whole challenge was to keep up. That's changed a little, perhaps. And in this moment, people in the emerging era, it's not demand that's bringing people to church or engaging any institutions. It's actually whether they're finding meaning there. And deep meaning. The kind of meaning, I'm seeing nods, good. The kind of meaning that they know they need in their life. And so there's this shift from the age of institutions where churches thrived because of demand. Now they're thriving due to meaning. And so the way that's playing out is rather interesting. For us, and I think the statistic might be similar. For about 50% of our growing churches across the Presbyterian Church USA, they are churches such as Zoe Presbyterian Church, where they are weaving the cultural traditions and heritage of a particular people group together with their religious convictions and beliefs. They are, yeah, okay, I heard a sure, yeah, well, obviously. Except that's not always, except that we do have it in our history where the cultural practices of certain people groups was not okay. We got to get over that, if we're not already. So Zoe Presbyterian, for example, that's a small group of them. They are a people group located on the border between India and Myanmar. They have been there for thousands of years, and that there is a line drawn through their ancestral land is the way the world worked. But they are being ethnically cleansed right now, and so many have had refugee status and are now being resettled across the world, but including the United States. And so we actually have just in Atlanta alone, 2 Zoe Presbyterian churches. And the idea is they get to wear the colors and worship in the language and eat the foods of their home. Yes. And this is game-changing. With 110 people who have been forcibly displaced around the world right now, who have been forced from their homes, that search for home, for having family. A lot of our churches are wide, extended families within a people group that are being constructed because the actual family, one of them's over here in this part of the world, the other one's over here in this part of the world, and they haven't had the opportunity to always stay together. So I'm going to fast forward ahead. This is Rise Community Church. They're doing something similar. They're an African-American congregation forging what for them is meaningful African-American identity, and they are inventing it. And it means so much to them because they feel like they are connecting to something that's missing in their life at the same time that it goes deep, because it is also about their faith. Shalom International, another one. This is actually not just one people group. This is a Pan-African group of mostly refugee people who've been resettled to Clarkston, Georgia. And so they have people from so many different people groups across Africa who are now here. And so they make sure that they go and they keep a chart, actually, to make sure that they're singing the songs of and in the language of the different, people. And they just make sure that everybody is seen, and they rotate it around. And they're not trying to wash out anybody's identity, but they are claiming a distinctively Pan-African community as they are resettling into the United States. And so this kind of a thing, 50% of our churches who are growing are new immigrant churches who are doing this. They are combining, they're finding deep meaning in their cultural heritage, combining well with their Christian religious heritage. And in South Africa, I was able to find a statistic. 40.6% of the people in South Africa would like this in a church. That's your hugest demographic right there, of the Christians, that is. So we're going to come back to more ways of finding meaning in just a minute. But that's because now we've got, several shifts all kind of happening at once, which is going to be true in the emerging era. And so you're smart, you can do this. We're going to come back from demand to meaning, but we're going to pause for a second and look at another shift that is really important. So many congregations have a long history, and this was indeed the priority structure and the way you did things well and responsibly in the age of institutions. You look at one organizational priority at a time, right? If you're going to do strategic planning, you just do strategic planning. You don't do strategic planning and renovate the building and, restructure the staff all at the same time. You do it one after the other so they can inform each other and, that kind of a thing. Well, that's great when when you're not in an era of a lot of change. Right now, we need to move from that singular focus on kind of one organizational challenge to actually dealing with all three of the major questions most of our churches are facing. In fact, I don't like making overstatements, so I don't want to say all of our churches, but I can't find any who are not facing these three questions. So I almost said all. That's as close as it gets. The three questions that most mainline churches in the English-speaking world are facing are, number one, it's about a financial model. The financial models are not working. The offering, the plate, it's just not enough. We have fewer people. They may be very generous. In fact, sometimes maybe too generous, given that they also need to take care of their own, but it's not enough, and we need a new financial model. Number two, at the same time, we have people who want the church, and I think most of us probably fit into this category, to actually be effectively involved in engaging some social ills. There is stuff going on, and we want not just for us to build up everybody in the church and send them on out to be great individuals to go, work with literacy over here and work with food scarcity over here. We want to actually be, as a church and as a shared witness, part of effectively addressing, we're not going to cover it all ourselves, but part of effectively addressing a social ill. We can't do them all, but at least meaningfully engaged in one. This gets back to from demand to meaning. And then three, there is great interest, much like the Blockbuster illustration, in being church in a different way. Now, I don't know anybody who knows exactly what that means, but I do know that people who never would have missed Sunday morning are now perfectly fine to miss one or two a month. And it adds up. And it's not that they're less committed to the church, and it's not that they are not participating well. It's that sometimes they need something different in their life on a Sunday morning, or on you can fill in the blank about whatever program it is. And so they're still highly committed to church, but they just need, and don't quite know what this means, but they need church to be different somehow. They need to be church different in the world. So those are the three opportunities and challenges that we actually need to look at all together. Because if you're like, okay, well, I'm going to deal with the finances first, we're going to deal with these other two topics later, then in 4 years, you're just going to have to deal with the finances again. Because if you can figure out a financial model that'll get you through the next 4 years, but you haven't figured out what it means that even you and I as leaders kind of want and need church to be slightly different. Like, we need to embody church, not all different, but if we haven't figured out how we need church to be for us, then we're going to keep having attrition, which means that the financial model has to be dealt with again. And if we're not actually engaging social ills well, a lot of people feel like, well, our faith isn't in action. And so eventually they disappear. So we have to do all three at once, because if we line them up one by one by one by one, it's a multi-pronged conversation right now. However, God's in this. God will lead us. We're just articulating right now, like, we're making clear what's going on so that we can discern how to move forward. So, at the same time, there is a move from demand to meaning. People really want meaning. And you can see this. In our country, Dunkin' Donuts wins all the coffee tasting contests over Starbucks every time. I know. You wouldn't think about this. Dunkin' Donuts tastes, theoretically, better than Starbucks coffee. Now, I don't like coffee at all, so this doesn't work for me. I like rooibos, it turns out. But Starbucks is far more successful. More people will go. Why? Starbucks realized that they need to offer meaning, and people need a place to gather. They need a place to sit. Last time I was at Dunkin' Donuts, A, it felt like a KFC, and B, if after you finish your drink you don't leave, you kind of get some looks from the people behind the desk or behind the cash register. Whereas Starbucks, they've created meaning by providing a community gathering space. You can meet someone there and have a conversation. You can actually pull out your book or your computer and work for a minute. They've realized that this isn't about demand. You can get better coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. It's about meaning. And they've realized what kind of meaning they want to do. So you can see this meaning piece even taking over, maybe even amongst friends or children. I will only eat, the fish sustainably, fished from this company because it gives me great meaning to not be involved with something bad for the environment. You've seen people make these kinds of decisions over and over again. I want to buy clothes made of recycled materials. Okay. It's giving people meaning. They want to be doing something about the environment and all the tricky stuff. You can see this move from demand to meaning even in the larger culture. But for now, there are other ways that other churches have done it. This, for example, is a picture of Herbert Brown, the Reverend, the Dr. Herbert Brown III. And he's the pastor of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. I was hoping there was a Baptist here today, but no? Okay, well, they're our friends anyway. And the bottom line is, in 2015, Freddie Gray was killed at the hands of police. Baltimore broke open. There were protests. The city was understandably outraged, and it was a mess. Police lined up to kind of lock down and try to get order. It was a mess. One of the side effects of this whole thing is that people without good transportation or without good access to food, healthy food, couldn't get to the grocery stores. A lot of streets are locked down. Well, this church had a reputation for being a food church. So people would call, hey. And so Herbert Brown got serious and said, I don't know how we're going to do this, but what we can do is we can take all the green space in our church, plant it, and start growing healthy food, and then we can provide it affordably. They couldn't afford to just give it. So another financial model, right? We had to grow it and then provide a fair trade market for good food. Worked it out where deals with black farmers. Also, hey, we need food, you need business, let's do a soil to sanctuary initiative. I'm going to play this video, which will let him tell you a little bit more, but you can kind of hear the meaning that they're offering, right? It is distinctly African American or black. I think Caribbean Americans and others kind of get to join in too. But it's distinctively black, and that's very meaningful. They're saying we're not waiting around for anybody else to help us, and it's very meaningful to them, and it should be. And number two, they're providing healthy, affordable food to people who didn't otherwise have it. That's a game changer. And this has become the center point of their church.
Hi, my name is Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III, and for the past decade, I have been working with African American congregations and black farmers. We do this under the banner of our organization called the Black Church Food Security Network. We were born in 2015 in the middle of the Baltimore uprising. While demonstrations and protests were going on all over the city, we were working to advance food justice because we recognized that no justice, no peace also links to a piece of the pie and power over your plate. Baltimore City government backed up off of these communities. Nonprofit organizations backed up in the middle of the uprising. The support that we needed was just not there. We realized in that moment that charity had failed us, and it was time for us to do something for ourselves. I started calling around to my farmer friends and my pastor friends. We brought church and farm together to create a Black-led food system. Utilizing the resources of our churches, we began to feed ourselves. What started out just at one church now has spread across the country. Historic African-American congregations all over the United States have linked with the Black Church Food Security Network in order to advance food sovereignty in our community.
The Black Church Food Security Network specializes in partnering with historically African American congregations for community empowerment. We do this through our two major programs, Operation Higher Ground and the Soil to Sanctuary Market. Through Operation Higher Ground, we help churches expand or establish community gardens. The Soil to Sanctuary Market is where we partner with Black farmers to sell fresh produce in church-owned dining halls, parking lots, and multi-purpose rooms. So yeah, we transform church spaces into mini farmers markets to sell produce directly to Black communities.
We believe that you can't get a handle over your health until you have power over your plate. We believe that it's time for us to do what we need to do for ourselves and our community.
If you are connected to a church, then head over to our website to join our church covenant partnership. And if you are a farmer, then join our Black Farmer Directory so we can connect you to niche markets within the Black church community.
So you can hear the meaning there. It is about empowerment. It is about food. It is about so much more. And it's become so popular that they now have a network of churches who want to do this because it provides deep meaning and meets a social need and introduces a financial model that works. They're not giving away the food. It's affordably priced. It's fairly priced. People buy it. And that helps pay the bills. It is their ministry in the community and with and amongst each others, and they get to be church in a different way. This kind of thing is one example among many. I'm going to page through this one pretty fast. This is this is the garage, but now they're in a gym. This is a church that wanted to be really serious about health and helping people who were unfit and whose just lifestyle was not working for health. And so With All Your Strength Ways is the name of their church, and they are all about health, and they meet in a gym, and 50% of the people who come to the gym need to pay the normal membership and can afford to do so, and that help underwrite the other 50% who are people who would not have access to a gym and all of the health-related resources that come with it. And they get to be, and it's a model financially that works, and they get to be church in a different, meaningful way. They are all about health. So you can see the move from demand to meaning. These are some pictures from La Puebla Iglesia. It's a church up in New York. They have basically reformed themselves now to become an immigration services hub. And they are on the front lines of some justice issues with immigration services. Now, people have to pay for those. They make it affordable, and they certainly have sliding scales, but that makes it an affordable financial model for the church at the same time that you can see how they are working on a social ill in a way that makes sense for them. Are you all kind of getting it? Are you hearing this whole demand to meaning thing? Yeah. This one, Christ Church, I won't go into the details. Bottom line, they had about 25, 40 people in worship, about to close the doors. They went out into the community and kind of did a listening sort of thing with each other, with themselves, What have been it was kind of part of their goodbye, right? What have been the really meaningful things we've done? When were we brave? When did we start something new? What's the history of us? And they also went out into the community. Hey, tell us, because they were trying to figure out what to do with the building, but just tell us, what are the priorities here? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? Where do you want this community to be in 10 years? It turns out that they have this stained glass window, actually, that you can see. It's Jesus' healer, the great physician. And they realize they're all about healthcare, and they always have been, and they have this huge tradition. And there is no healthcare clinic in this area that people can even get to if you don't have transportation. So they partnered up with the hospital. The hospital has a contract, pays the bills for the building because they've opened a clinic, not one, but 4 clinics, foot clinic, eye clinic. You can kind of see the thing. Half the people have insurance and can pay, and the hospital provides the, professionals. Half the people cannot. And so it's a really effective way to address the social ills with a financial model that works. And it lets them be church differently. They have the sanctuary open before and after the appointments. The pastor there that was in the previous, he is both the pastor of the church, but he's also the executive director of the health clinic. He's their #1 fundraiser, and and that's his job. It's the only way this is going to be affordable. Volunteer medics come now and offer their time as well as the paid ones, which helps build the thing. They are now coming for worship because they like being church that can provide affordable health care in a location and amongst people who might not otherwise have it. So I hope you're starting to see. Bottom line, we're connecting with younger people. 50% are under 50. They're far more racially diverse, which is more of a thing, I think, in the US. But 77% self-identify as new to church. So before we go do these small groups, I want to tell you one last story, because I want it to be in the hopper as you imagine forward and as you do your own discernment work with God. So we're moving from demand to meaning. Half the time we're working for the church because we love the church. But God? God doesn't see the church as an object of his love. God sees the church as an instrument of his love and wants us to get out there and is saying, I have called and equipped you. This is going on in the world. I send you. So often we think of the church as an object of our love when in fact it's an instrument of God's. So providing that meaning. But we also need to work not just singular questions at a time, but we got to work with all three. Because frankly, I think the shifts are urgent, and I think you think that too. Okay, so time to talk to me. I need you loud. You were pretty tame on the small group conversation earlier, but I need you loud. Warm up your vocal cords. Don't tell me the name of the company. Tell me what they offer the world. Okay, you ready? Just yell it out. What does each company offer the world? Chicken. Well done. Okay, good job, y'all. Yeah, that was louder. Mm-hmm. I heard you. Okay. Mm-hmm. There we go. Yep. Yeah, we got to get better on this answer. We are being called to offer meaning. Yes. Okay, so ingredients in the secret sauce: grieving well, humility, hope, meaning, and multimodal approaches. This is the story I want to end with, and then we'll send you off to your small groups here for conversation. Now, I'm checking to see what time it is. Okay, I'm going to tell this story fast. This is a picture of Springhouse Ministry Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The backstory on this is that in 2002, a church was on its last legs. They had very little energy left. They had maybe 50 people in worship. The building was huge. It was a hungry building, desperate for resources, and that was taking up all that they would rather spend on actually helping people. And it was just a no-win sort of a thing. So they were wondering what to do. They entered conversations that took several years with the church that was nearby. turns out they decided to build a partnership. Now, this took several years to get to, but they didn't want to merge and become the same church. They wanted their own identities. They liked being their own church. And so the two were going to become one, which meant that they made plans to sell one building and move both congregations into one building. So they're working on the financial model. And they also realized that affordable housing was huge in this area. So they made up all these plans to go and build into. So they're going to sell one church, take the proceeds, use it to renovate the new buildings, the other church's building space, and to build affordable housing and some parking areas into the whole thing. So they get all these plans together. This is like, by the way, 5 years later, 2002, 2007. They are ready. I mean, because this stuff takes time. At the same time, it's urgent. We also have to do it really well. So they are ready to go ahead with their plans, and they've got it all worked out, and the neighbors shut it down. They were like, I don't think so. Not in my neighborhood. So they went back to the drawing board. This time, there's a third congregation that's also kind of iffy and having a hard time surviving. By the way, one of them is Lutheran, one is UCC, and one is Disciples of Christ. So they are not the same denomination. But they are also interested in a partnership. They don't have enough money to buy in equally, because if you're going to one-third own it, you got a one-third put in. Otherwise, you have that awkward, like, well, I own a little more of this than you do, so I get my way, kind of a dynamic that just creeps in every once in a while. I'm sure you know nothing about that. So it was going to be one-third. The third congregation did not have enough money to buy in equally, so they invested, hired a consultant to help them raise the money. They raised the money, and suddenly, boom, it was going to be one-third. But now they're going to renovate this space, and it's going to be for 3 congregations. At the same time, however, that they started talking to this third church, they also started talking to the neighbors. And I shake my head like that because it's almost as if we have forgotten that God said, love your neighbor as yourself. Because we just overlook them so often, not always. And well done if you do not. But we're talking about the literal local neighbors. And, so they started talking with them and building relationships, not to get anything done, but just to kind of meet the neighbors. They knew that part was faithful. Long story short, they go ahead. They make the plans for the renovation of the one big building into kind of a space that all 3 churches would have. And because they'd been working with the neighbors too were concerned about affordable housing. They just didn't want somebody making all these decisions for their own neighborhood that they didn't get a voice in. And I can't blame them, really. Can you? They wanted to have some autonomy about what's next door. So, affordable housing, back on. They renovate the space. They build in affordable housing. It's affordable housing. They're not giving it away. So again, they're working on the financial model. This is going to help pay for the person who takes care of the whole building. It's going to help with the budget. It's also affordable, so it's fair, however. And they build a building, they rebuild the building so that they have 3 different places for worship. 1, a sanctuary, a little bit like this. 2, more like a fellowship hall, where you could have the person who's leading worship in the middle and all the chairs around. 3, more like a stage. And then they decided to each worship in each area for only 3 months, so that nobody kind of owned one area over the others. So they're like, well, that's mine, kind of a thing. And so that, like, Advent every year would be in a different space. So it's not like, oh, thank goodness we're back in the sanctuary for Advent. It's, you think creatively. Suddenly worship is far more dynamic because you're having to think through how you will worship in each of these new spaces. So they share Sunday school. It's popping now because they have a large number of people who are interested. They each go to their own worship services, though they do worship together 4 times a year. They share a youth group, and they have all these local ministries that they do in common at the same time that their international kind of relationships, et cetera, are largely done through their judicatories and their denominations. And so they are 3 independent churches, 1 building. The Springhouse Ministry Center is the name for it. And basically, they built in an area right next to the spring around which the town used to grow up, where everybody would come to find the resources that they need for life. And so, the affordable housing, the initiatives, people come to them now to partner. They don't only have to go out, though they do. And there is this whole new life at Springhouse Ministry Center with 3 churches that thought they were about to close. They've got the financial model. They figured out how they want to be church. And it's a little different, some the same, but they also figured out how they wanted to effectively be involved in addressing a social ill. It's time for you all to go to small groups and discuss all this stuff.